Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 1st, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Yes, it is
finally 2025.
2025, hump day.
It is hump day, and every day that passes, well, I just want the Trump administration to get started already, so we can just start to begin to say, like, these are as many, we're chipping away at the days where he's the president. That's what I need.
Let the countdown begin, but we're really
I know we're 20 out, but
still in the countdown to the beginning of the countdown.
I know.
But I am excited because I'm going to scratch off one day in which I successfully stated what year it was properly.
We'll see. Maybe we'll have a running tally going forward.
I think my guess is tomorrow, Thursday, when we are live, I screw it up. But we still have one more day of our best of 2024. We have an extended vacation this year because of the weird, the way that January 1st fell. On the program today, Dylan Penningroth. It's an interview from April of 2024. He is a professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Helpful to get a sense of, how when we look at societal change and progress, there's a tendency to think that it happens in any given moment, but in fact, it doesn't. It takes years and years and years of smaller victories and no victories before you get to a tipping point. I mean, that is really largely the dynamic with any type of change for the most part. And, people recognize that maybe in more narrow circumstances, but assume that history, for sometimes people assume it works in a different way, and it doesn't. And so it's an interesting interview, one of the best of 2024.
For sure.
We may or may not have some of Matt's surprises today. I would tell Matt Bradley, actually, that we shouldn't do it today because, it's New Year's Day. People are going to be recovering, although maybe they need some YouTube. I don't know. We're going to decide. Matt will decide.
Okay.
In the meantime, we will be back tomorrow live with bells on.
You're on Thursday.
I'm going to come a special. I'm going to start off 2025 hard, coming on Thursday. A special Thursday appearance. I haven't been on a Thursday. Well, maybe once in 2024. I feel like there was one day. That was it. And we'll be back live tomorrow, and then it'll be Friday. And then we start the weekend all over again. Fantastic. All right, folks. Hope you had a great New Year's Eve last night, and wish you a happy New Year. 2025, this is the year it's going to happen for us. What that is, I don't know.
Something will happen.
But I'm glad that you guys are here, and I hope you will spend the 2025 with us because, again, it is obviously we could do this in our apartments with no one else there. Our loved ones would very quickly tire of us, and it really wouldn't be as gratifying.
Right.
Were it not for the idea that there are literally tens of thousands of you out there, sometimes more, who are listening and hopefully doing stuff in furtherance of change in this country. We'll see you live tomorrow. Stick around for Dylan Penningroth, give you a little historical perspective, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley, author of Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So let's start with, I guess, the genesis of your doing this really, a decade long, more, I think, of research into these documents and essentially recreating the way that recently freedmen and slaves would interact with our society through its legal channels. But let's start with your great aunt and uncle, maybe three greats. I'm not quite sure, which led you to sort of, I guess, begin the interest in this.
Absolutely. So when I was growing up, I used to hear family stories at reunions, cookouts, things like that. And one day I got my hands on a recording of my great uncle, Thomas Holcomb, who was talking about his father, Jackson Holcomb. And one of the stories that he tells on that cassette tape, it's one of these old Memorex tapes, is of when his father gave a boat ride to a bunch of Confederate soldiers in the closing days of the Civil War, about 1865, across a river that they needed to cross. And in the story, he mentioned something that's really curious to me, which is that when they got to the other side of the Appomattox River, the soldiers got out and they paid him. And that seemed to be a really strange thing to do because, after all, Jackson Holcomb was a slave. And the soldiers really had no legal reason to pay him. And of course, they had all the guns and every reason to be angry about losing a war over slavery. And yet they paid him apparently without asking any questions. And that really got me thinking about why would white men in 1865 be so, why would they think of paying an enslaved man for services so casually, almost matter-of-factly, almost as if this enslaved man had contract rights? And one of the things that I came to realize over the years is that contract rights are one of the fundamental rights that fall in the category civil rights. And so we can talk more about what civil rights are, but the first thing I just want to sort of lay down is that civil rights in 1865 are not quite the same thing that we mean by civil rights today.
I was even stunned that, both that they're paying a slave and a black man, but I was just stunned that they were paying anybody at that point, to be honest with you. Particularly in retreat, it's not like you're going back the other way. And so I was surprised by that. Just like in a general sense, before we get into specifically like how this set of rights and access to the law was available to a group of people that we wouldn't have anticipated would be available. But why was that so sacrosanct that they were compelled to pay in that instance?
I think it goes to a really fundamental question that is looming back up in front of us very much over the past few years, and that is a question about the rule of law. So, you can think about the rule of law as this kind of abstract thing that hovers over society. You can think that we often assume that it's this very strong, sturdy set of ironclad laws. But in fact, the rule of law is a set of expectations that all of us hold about essentially the way things work in the world. And when the rule of law gets torn and there are no consequences, things can go south in a hurry. So one of the moments when the rule of law often comes close to getting torn is during wartime. And so during the Civil War, you see both on the part of Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers, this, I won't say it's that they're always doing it, but there is this really incredible attention to the rule of law in the following sense. When they take property for use by the army, they give receipts they keep track of it. And in fact, the Northern Army that leads to a congressional commission that is aimed at compensating loyal Southerners for property that they lost during the Civil War. And I think that's the same set of motivations that leads these Southern soldiers to observe, essentially, it's not that they think Jackson Holcomb has a right to be paid. It's that there is this sense that people have an expectation to be paid for services, including slaves. So this is coming out of a world that I describe in the early chapters of the book, where enslaved people have privileges to earn money and get paid for it. And so the soldiers are essentially recognizing this world, not so much as a set of rights, but a set of expectations that everyone is a part of. And if they tear that set of expectations, things can get really bad for everyone.
Was this a function, because you're going from 1864 to 1970 in this examination of how these rights, how Black people basically experience these rights. But do you think a function of, I guess it reminds me of part of the whole sort of civil rights era was, in part at least, a function of the U.S. competition with the Soviet Union, where there was this pressure where we needed to show, third world countries, non-aligned countries, that we were, providing rights for all our citizens as a way of basically selling ourselves. Was that what was going on? Is that why these type of personal interactions on some level were upheld, because there was a sense of half the country, regardless of whether I'm from the Union or the Confederate, is against us, and we need to show that we're a little bit above, that we're better. You're going to be able to prosper, and the only way you're going to be able to do that in the context of this country is if we have some measure of upholding these type of personal exchanges.
I think the larger question, the larger point that you're making is absolutely correct. Although in 1864, they're not really worried about what other countries are thinking about them so much.
Well, no, I meant within the competition. I'm using that as an analogy.
Oh, I
U.S.
see.
and and Russia competing with each other. It's bringing out their better angels, and I wonder if that wasn't the case too with the Union and Confederate when they had to have these type of transactions.
I think that might have gone into it a little bit. I think that what mattered more to these folks is that they're thinking of local neighborhood understandings about property. So I'll just take an example that I think all of us can, or many of us can relate to. If you have a home mortgage, that mortgage, it records. It depends on a series of transactions that come down from property owners before you. So when you buy the property, you have to take out title insurance from Chicago Title or something like that. And what they do is they send people to the courthouse to look up the chain of title. And what they want to find is a clean, unbroken chain going from the first owner down to you. If they find a break in the chain of title, then you've got problems, because then the property is at risk of someone else showing up and saying, I actually have the rights to this. It'll be expensive to defend. Someone will have to go to court. That's what title insurance is for. And so it's that set of understandings that I think people are really keenly attuned to. And as I said, these understandings have everything to do with civil rights. So when I talk about civil rights, I'm talking about property, contract, and the right to sue and be sued. Now, Jackson Holcomb didn't have civil rights, but what he had was privileges. He had the privilege to earn money. He had the privilege to make deals, bargains. But in the event, in practice, what he and many other enslaved people found was that these privileges were so widely respected, not always, but they were widely enough respected that you can see that they're following the same logic that rights do, the rights that white people have. And so one of the things that I argue in the book is that in 1865, when Black people become free, and in 1866, when you get America's first Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States have the same right as white persons to own property, make contracts, and sue and be sued. That's actually not a huge break from the slavery period. Like, it's really easy to think that slavery is the absolute opposite of freedom, right? And that, in a sense, is what so much of our politics is built on, this idea that a slave is the absolute opposite of a free person. In some senses, that's right when it comes to political rights or so-called social rights, which you can talk about in a minute. But when it comes to civil rights, the actual practice that white people and Black people in the South experienced in their everyday life, when it comes to things like paying for being ferried across a river, or paying for chickens or eggs, paying for brooms, things that enslaved people make sort of on the margins of society, selling them in the town square. White people are used to dealing with slaves on that basis. They're used to seeing slaves essentially owning things like pigs and exercising rights over chickens and boats and things like that. And so in that sense, 1865, 66 is not such a sharp break. And once we start to think of it that way, it starts to give, I think, a different perspective on the conservative Supreme Court majority's views about things like race and rights.
Well, what does it tell? I mean, I want to come back to that question as to what does it tell us about that. But give us a sense of the kind of research that you did do so that people understand what was uncovered here, because I think, you know, looking back, it is hard to have imagined, at least in that era anyways, that there was the opportunity for Black people to access the courts even.
Sure. No, this book took a little while, as you mentioned a bit ago. And part of the reason it took so long is that one of the key types of sources I used was court records from county courthouses. So these are not digitized. They're not online. Most of them are handwritten, and they're out in county courthouses. And so what I would do is I would hop in my rental car and I would drive out to Holly Springs, Mississippi, or Jackson, Mississippi, and I would go downtown to the county square. And I would walk past the big Confederate statue that stands outside of every county courthouse in the South, even today. And I would go inside and I would ask to see old court documents. And so I used two kinds. One was these big cloth-bound, leather-bound ledgers. They weigh about 10 pounds each. And I would take down names of people in lawsuits. And I was looking mostly at civil suits. And once I got the names, I would go back, and my research assistants and I would look up the names in the census to try to figure out which of these names was Black. So here's a funny thing at the beginning. These local court records, surprisingly, do not flag race. They don't say Dylan Penningroth, Negro. Nowhere does it say that on these court documents. And that in itself is a really interesting question. Why not? But in practical terms, what it meant is that we had to take this extra step in order to do this research. We had to figure out which of these cases involved Black people. By the end, we collected 14,000 cases. And of those, we found about 1,500 that involved Black people, either as plaintiffs or defendants. And in almost all of those 1,500 cases, there was no clue that the people involved were Black. Then I went back to the courthouse and I looked and I asked for the loose papers. So behind those leather-bound documents, there is often a folder or a set of, bound up papers wrapped in red tape, literally red tape. And I would unfold it and I would read the testimony, if there was any. And from that, I begin to piece together a story of how African Americans are engaging with law, thinking about law, talking about law, all the way back to 1872, going forward to the late 1960s.
And so you talk about like the sort of the conception of rights, the civil rights, social rights, political rights under the law, and also you describe that ultimately the way that Black people are engaging with the law at this era and going forward ends up setting up a sort of like, I guess, a pursuit of prescriptive rights on some level. Is that right? And explain what that means.
So prescriptive rights are this broad category of rights in modern law, and they go back a long ways, that essentially say that actions that may not be legal can confer rights over time. So the classic example is your neighbor cuts across your backyard and you don't say anything. If that happens for long enough, and it's set differently in each state, but say 7 years, then your neighbor could actually say that he has rights to cut through your backyard.
There's been an easement created in a sort of de facto way.
You'd have a constructive easement. So these prescriptive rights can ripen over time into legal rights. You can actually turn trespassing into something legal. Now, there are all sorts of rules hedging it in. It doesn't happen very often, but the principle at the bottom of it is the one that I pick up and run with, which is that enslaved people are exercising prerogatives that are not legal rights, but they're so widely recognized and respected that they're part of the same logic that is at work in the doctrine of adverse possession, which is what I just described with cutting through your neighbor's backyard.
So what were those activities? I mean, like and we have that in the context of property law, right? Like, squatters or squatting rights. And that's why, people are making a big deal of it now, but this is something that has existed in law, I think, even, prior to, this was English common law, I think it was, that sort of established this concept of squatting rights, just broadly speaking. But what were those things, those actions that were being taken care of? Was it simply exercising their sort of contractual and almost, I don't know, what you would call that, commercial rights that ended up sort of expanding on some level?
Well, I think what I can say is that enslaved people's, when they're acquiring chickens, when they're growing vegetables in their back gardens, we're seeing them engage in economic activities. And there's two things that I think are key takeaways from that. One is that the masters are essentially shifting the costs of sustaining the slaves, like part of the costs of doing business, onto the slaves. So you always have to remember that a plantation is a profit-making business. Southerners like to describe it as, moonlight and magnolias. We're all one big happy family. But these are essentially capitalist enterprises. They're trying to make money. And one of the ways that masters made money was by cutting down on their operating costs. And they did that often by shifting the cost of feeding and clothing the slaves onto the slaves themselves. So the slaves, they have the quote unquote privilege of working for themselves after hours. Now, keep in mind that after hours is after sundown. So they've been working from sun up to sundown. And then they have the privilege of doing things like keeping pigs and chickens and selling them. And with the proceeds from those earnings, they feed themselves things that the master doesn't provide. So that means that the master can now give, 6 pounds of fat pork and a bunch of cornmeal, which on its own would be starvation. There's not enough nutrients in all that. But the master can do that because he knows that the enslaved people are going to get their vegetables through their own efforts. And so there are a lot of ways that this takes place. Elder care, masters shift the burdens of old age onto enslaved people. Medical care, same thing. And it's all done by exploiting this system of prescriptive rights that the slaves participate in. And again, this is sort of this larger set of understandings that helps explain why the soldiers paid Jackson Holcomb after he took them across the river. It's part of this same set of understandings. And if they didn't pay him, of course, they had the power not to pay him. They had the right not to pay him. But if they hadn't, they would have had to sort of upset that mental universe in which it is normal and expected to pay even an enslaved person for services performed.
How conscious were people at that time, do you think, of like, this is, I mean, on some level, you're talking about like social reproduction and so that the slaves could be available to work, you know, increasingly for even less than free, right? At that point. And how conscious was everybody in the South that this is, you know, when we pay this slave for ferrying us over, we are in some fashion supporting our broader system. Like this, like if we were to deny them, it would ultimately end up like undermining the plantation system.
It's hard to say how conscious ordinary people were. I think that things like this largely sort of, they go unconsciously.
Just become custom.
Custom. It's part of the water that you swim in. But there are moments when people kind of snap to attention. And those moments tend to be when a group of white people who feel aggrieved by the privileges that slaves have, they agitate in the state legislature to get a law passed. They essentially say things like, well, you know, we're mechanics, we're, taxi drivers, and we are aggrieved, and we think there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law against enslaved people working as mechanics or as taxi drivers. And so they get a law passed, and then it goes up to the court, the state Supreme Court, and the court once in a while will articulate openly that logic that we've been talking about. You know, and the court will say things like, well, everybody knows that in spite of the law saying that slaves can't do X, Y, and Z, everybody knows that slaves do it anyway. And everybody knows that this is part of the system, part of the set of understandings that makes our system work.
Interesting. And so then we have this, I mean, that dynamic, I would imagine, keeps playing out over and over again, because on one hand, you got to give slaves and even freedmen at that point who are going to come back and work on these farms in many respects through Reconstruction, the ability to support working at such low wages. I mean, we see that in the context of, Walmart relying on the government to provide Medicare on some level. This is some iteration of that. But then the rights or customs that are afforded to these freed black men they start to actually accrue wealth in some instances. I mean, you write about going from 1870 to 1910, home ownership goes from 43,000 to 500,000 over that time. You've got a similar sort of like other measures of property ownership. You talk about your great uncle and aunt, amassing a little bit of a tiny fortune, I guess, relatively speaking. And then, of course, we get this huge societal blowback in the form of a reemerged KKK in the 1910s and so on. But how does that play out legally? I mean, they go and they pass these laws. I would imagine that's where some like licensing laws came from and other things like that to exclude, to both allow, on one hand, you want to allow a certain amount of commerce in that, but then you also don't want them to like make that much money, assuming you're these people.
No, it's absolutely true. One of the fascinating things about this story is that the racial violence, the lynching that you mentioned, the KKK, it's actually, it is growing and peaking at the same time as this rise in Black wealth. So the high point of Black land ownership, 15 million acres around, sometime between 1910 and 1920. That is around the same time as the peak of lynching in the United States. The greatest number of Black people lynched. So these are actually happening at the same time.
Non-coincidentally, right? I mean, that's what the Tulsa massacre was about. I mean, that's what all of these massacres that happen towards the end of Reconstruction is. This is blowback, essentially, from I think what Carol Anderson wrote, like white rage, 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of situation.
It is blowback, and at the same time, the blowback does not succeed, and I think is not designed to succeed in driving Black people into utter poverty. You know, they never stamp out this Black middle class, and I think there are a lot of different reasons for that. But I think that one reason is that they don't need to. There are plenty of ways for wealthy white people to stay on top of the South's economic system other than eradicating a Black middle class. But another reason is that the rules of property and contract, they don't formally take race into account. So that chain of title that we were talking about earlier, nowhere in the chain of title does it typically say that this person was a Negro. And that's because property law doesn't have separate categories for white and Black people. It's just property law. And there are reasons for that within property law. You know, essentially it comes down to property law is really conservative. It's hard to change. But another reason, it's just really inefficient. Where would you put a ledger? Where would you put a transaction from a white person to a Black person? Should that go in the colored property or the white property? It right. Just becomes administratively a nightmare. So there are all sorts of reasons why white people don't completely deprive Black people of their property and their contract rights. But one of the biggest ones, I think, goes back to this, the same dynamic that we saw during slavery, which is that you don't need it. You don't need to deprive Black people completely of property in order for the system to work. And by the system, I mean a system that keeps most white people, along with most Black people, quite poor, and a small cadre of wealthy white people at the top. The system functions during freedom as well as in slavery. So I'll just give you a quick example that comes again from a different side of my family, which is in 1866, I found a contract dated 1866. I think it was June 30th, 1866, where a white man named William R. Baskerville signs a contract with, I guess, 30 or so Negroes formerly his slaves, right? So these are people who used to be his slaves. And one of the things that the contract says is each of these and formerly enslaved people is going to get a certain amount of corn at the end of the year, and they're going to perform certain jobs, but it doesn't go into great detail. The contract doesn't say much about what those jobs are. Instead, it says that they will perform the work as they have heretofore done while they were slaves. So there's this contract that's literally saying that these people are going to work like slaves, but because they're getting this contract, they are by definition, and by modern definitions that even John Roberts would understand, they are free because they have the right to make this contract, because they are going to be paid for services rendered. So the system functions to keep men like William R. Baskerville on top, and people like Rosa Baskerville, who I think is another one of my ancestors, although I can't trace it exactly. It serves to keep people like her poor. And it's done not in defiance of the law. This is not an instance where William R. Baskerville is running around with guns and whips and terrorizing Black people. It's working through the law. She's signing because she doesn't have any better options. She can either sign this contract or she can starve. And so this is the dynamic that keeps most Black people, and most white people for that matter, on the bottom economically. And it serves very well, even without violence, to keep the white elite on top.
So how does it ultimately mutate or grow into this? So this system of contract law is maintained because it services essentially the capitalist and the sort of slave economy, as it were. And it's easier to do. It makes it simpler administratively. If you want to keep Black people, if you want to put them in a different class when it comes to buying property, you do it before the transaction in some fashion. We redline, we say you can't buy here or whatever it is, but the transaction itself still maintains some type of legal integrity, I guess. But how does using this system, and a lot of times, I think you're right that most of the times that Black people went to court, it was in regards to a transaction with other Black people for the most part. But how does exercising and sort of invigorating this element of the law spread to the development of what we now call civil rights law and political rights, I guess?
That's a great question. So I think we have to go back to Abraham Lincoln's election. When he's campaigning for president, he articulates a vision of freedom that white Northerners are willing to sign on to in large enough numbers to make him president. And it goes like this, that there are three kinds of rights, three kinds of equality in America: political, social, and civil. Political rights mean the right to be elected to office, the right to vote, things like that, to serve on juries. Social rights are this grab bag of everything else, but it typically means the right to sit next to someone in a movie theater or to sit in a restaurant, or, and this is the most electric part of the campaign rhetoric, to marry someone. That's a social right. And so Lincoln says political rights are off the table for Black people. Social rights are definitely off the table. And he gets big laugh lines from audiences in Illinois during the Stephen Douglas debates for US Senate. He gets big laugh lines when he cracks jokes about, well, I don't want to sleep with a Black woman, and neither does anyone else in my party. And so those are off the table. But civil rights, that is, and this is how he puts it, the right to eat the bread which his own hand has earned by the sweat of his brow, the Negro is the equal of any white man in America. So Lincoln and the Republican Party come into the Freedom era with this vision of what you might call fundamental rights: property, contract, the right to sue and be sued. That's what goes in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That's a winning formula, a winning ticket for Republicans throughout the late 19th century. And it quickly gets turned into something that we're still living with today, which is this libertarian idea of civil rights, which is that that's all you need in order to be free. African Americans and their white allies consistently say, even before Lincoln is campaigning on this message, that yes, you need these fundamental rights, these libertarian rights, but you also need political rights, and you need equality in the sphere of the so-called social. It is a badge of slavery, they say, to force Black people to sit in a different section of a movie theater. It puts a mark on them that stigmatizes them and marks them as the descendants of slaves, humiliates them, subordinates them. And they say this consistently. And so that argument is something that activists begin in the 1830s and 40s, and they carry it through all the way through the civil rights marches of the 1960s. And the message is pretty simple. We need not just citizenship and equal rights in the realm of the civil, we need full citizenship. And until we have full citizenship, we are still, in some deep sense, enslaved.
And was it also the case that that those civil rights were, as they're exercised more, you begin to understand that they're also undermined if you don't have that sort of social and political, right? Because the political is ultimately determining what the nature of those civil rights are going to be. And if you're consistently dispossessed by them, whether it's, tax law that favors white wealthy people because they had the political power, or the fact that I can't eat in that restaurant, I can't travel to this town because I can't go to that hotel. That means I can't engage in the commerce that might be necessary if I'm a traveling salesman or something.
Absolutely. The connections are always there in some of the ways that you describe, and even more. So it is absolutely the case that activists argue that voting rights are essential to maintaining and protecting civil rights. And you can see that in the voting patterns that happen after Black people first get the right to vote in places like Mississippi. So the activists from SNCC, they go out, and their argument to people in Mississippi in 1964, 65, 66, their argument isn't vote for Lyndon Johnson to be president. Their argument is vote for the county tax assessor, vote these county supervisors out, because those are the guys who are maintaining this cabal of oligarchs at the county courthouse. These are the guys who determine whose land gets flooded, when the rains come. These are the guys who determine whose church is tax exempt, right? You need to go out and vote in order to throw out that old guard and elect a new guard who are going to redo the tax assessments. And so there's this fascinating story that happens there. And it goes to your point that these rights are interconnected. I'll give you another example. You've probably heard the case New York Times versus Sullivan, which is about press freedom. Mm-hmm. And there are at least 2 Supreme Court justices who want to overturn New York Times versus Sullivan. We'll see whether they can get others to sign on. But one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in that case is that, it's a libel suit that Alabama officials file against a bunch of Black ministers and activists for an advertisement that they took out. And they win damages against these ministers. And they take the damages essentially by seizing the ministers' land and automobiles. So it's this incredible attack on Black people's civil rights, that is in the old-fashioned Abraham Lincoln sense, in order to attack this modern effort, this effort to achieve civil rights in the modern sense, that is anti-discrimination, equal and first-class citizenship in all realms of life.
And lastly, I guess, how does the civil rights of Lincoln's era, that being sort of like the transactional, operational rights of commerce and whatnot, ultimately become defined to include political and social rights by the time we get to, I don't know, the 1960s? Is it both a function of like a push from one direction and a pull from the other, or how does that change? How does that language change, and does it change under the law as well, or is that always been more of like a more vernacular question?
It's a long, slow process, and one of the interesting things is that, when you're looking at these cases in county courthouses, nobody ever really says civil rights. What they do is they go and they say, well, my neighbor's fence is, encroaching on my land, or that person's cow got into my land. They don't say I'm pursuing a civil rights case, even though that is essentially what they're doing. But what you see, especially beginning in the 1940s, is this increasing rhetorical turn toward equating civil rights with Negro rights. So there's this Life magazine cover in 1947 that my friend Chris Schmidt went back to and uncovered, where, you know, it essentially says that, you know, civil rights means Negro rights. And as civil rights becomes more identified with Blackness and Black equality, it becomes more identified with this anti-discrimination, anti-subordination principle. Now, that had always been there since the 1866 Civil Rights Act, because you remember it said, shall enjoy the same rights as are enjoyed by white citizens. So it's always been there all along. But by the 1940s, that same logic is being used to revive this older logic of anti-discrimination in property and contract, and to extend it into the world of the social and the political. And in a sense, that's kind of what the civil rights struggle is all about in the 1950s and 60s. But what's fascinating is that Black people keep exercising those old-fashioned civil rights. And of course, we still are today, right? We own houses, we're making contracts, we're running businesses and churches, all of which are dealing with contract and property 24/7. But the rhetoric of civil rights increasingly implies that those activities, that those ideas about property and contract, it implies that those are not civil rights, that there's something else. They're in a different category. You can even see it in law schools. You know, law schools teach this important curriculum in the first year, and it consists of a bunch of courses, and the headliners are property, contract, and tort, and civil procedure, and criminal procedure. Those are the courses that students learn in their first year. And then, if you want, in the third year, you can take an elective called civil rights. So there's this implication that the two are distinct. The 19th century sense that civil rights are property and contract, I think, has been lost even in law schools.
It's fascinating. Dylan Penningroth, professor of law and history at the University of California, Berkeley. The book is Before the Movement, The Hidden History of Black Civil Rights. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I missed this, I guess, almost a week ago on Club Random because I never watch anything of Club Random. Don't watch that show, but occasionally some clips come by our way. Bill Maher is talking with Henry Winkler. Henry Winkler, of course, was the Fonz on Happy Days. He was also on The Lords of Flatbush. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, guys. Worth, having a view of what Brooklyn was like in the 1950s. He is an actor, he's a writer, and here he is with Bill Maher. And Bill Maher, apparently, is he wearing for a completely non-religious guy, this guy is really trying on his Pope hat.
Minister, are we allowed to talk about that?
Of course, you can talk about anything. That's what I love about this.
I really think that he knows if, God forbid,
pause it for a second.
Down.
I'm sorry. He's talking about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Obviously, let's just go back a little bit. Coming in the word minister does not help us.
Yeah. Oh. What about their prime minister? Are we allowed to talk about that?
Of course, you can talk about anything. That's what I love about this.
I really think that he knows if, God forbid, he steps down or the war is over, he's in jail.
I mean, that's possible, and we hear that a lot. I mean, it's interesting.
I believe it to my core.
Yeah, well, you don't know what's, I mean, that could be the case. You don't know what's in a person's heart. Whether that's true or not, you can still be supportive of the decisions he's making, which I am.
Okay.
It's very naive, I think, that this could go any other way.
Right.
And any other country in the world would not be expected to act any differently. If you
pause
get
it for
attacked,
a second. The idea that the idea that this relentless killing would be justified if anybody else was engaging in it is just absurd. In fact, the whole world, as evidenced by, the UN and international law, has said that they've been engaging in an occupation for decades. And that is, the charitable view. There is an argument that they have been engaging in an occupation since 1948. But at the very least, if you're going to go by the UN, or maybe he doesn't recognize the UN. Maybe when he just says the whole world, he's just like making up, I don't know what. But if you're going to go by the UN, which did give Israel a mandate, they also said that they're an occupying force. And there are laws, actually, about, what people can do for resistance, whether you agree with them or not. But the idea that any country would do this, I'm sorry. Give me a break. We have seen, we've seen attacks that have taken place in countries in Europe and this and that. We don't see mass invasions in that respect.
Okay. It's very naive, I think, that this could go any other way.
Right.
And any other country in the world would not be expected to act any differently. If you get attacked, you get to fight back. And the war doesn't end when you start fighting back, which they always want with Israel.
Pause it also, just keep it up. The funny part is like how he has to pause when he says, you get to fight back. Because it's really, it's a slaughter.
What you're saying is true. However, I think that, there are parents, there are families that are hurting because the hostages are not.
Yes, and it's the job of a statesman and a leader and a prime minister to think long term and not just short term. Like if they don't eliminate Hamas,
they're not going to eliminate Hamas. Hamas is an idea, not a group of people.
That's a bullshit thing.
It's not bullshit.
Well, let me tell you something. They've said that for years. I just read, I think, Sam Harris on this, and he said,
okay.
Okay, great. I love Sam. Great. I'm glad we both do. Yeah. And he said this thing we've heard a lot of times, you can't kill an idea. He said, well, we did after World War II.
Until now.
We did kill a lot of Japanese, and that was unfortunate.
Right.
But, if you do kill enough lunatics, and Japan was led by lunatics,
right.
Died of the last person and a lot of suicide bombing and all that. Very similar to what we see with radical Muslims.
Right.
Suicide bombing, cult of martyrdom.
Right.
Okay, so Japan became our good friend. So let's not pretend that you can't actually get to the root of this. It is difficult.
I'm not pretending.
No.
I truly believe in this particular case.
You will not.
You don't think that all those people that are now homeless and their families are destroyed, you don't think that they are now
I think you have
Hamas
to make calculation.
Again?
Of course, absolutely. That is going to happen. You are also recruiting.
You want to kill every human being?
No. Is that what I said?
No, but I think it is what you were leading to.
No, it is certainly not what I'm leading to. What I'm saying is...
If we kill enough of them, we're going to end Hamas.
I didn't say that either.
I think you did.
No, I didn't. Okay. You said it.
You want to play it back?
Yeah, I did.
I didn't say that.
I didn't say that.
I did not say if you kill enough of them, where the Hamas is over.
No, what I said was the idea that you can't kill an idea.
Oh, that's what I said.
Yeah. That's what I was objecting to.
Right.
And I was quoting Sam talking about the fact that after
World War II, we did not kill Nazism.
Yeah, we did.
Except for like a moment. It's back almost in every country.
Back in a tiny fringe. Oh. I mean, if you expect perfection, you're...
Well, pause it for 1 second. Now, at some other time, Bill Maher is going like, anti-Semitism is rampant.
Exactly, yeah.
But one of the ways that you kill the idea that we need liberation is to liberate people. But the idea that like, and somehow there is a number of people that you can kill where all of a sudden they're just going to go, okay, we no longer care about being in an open air prison. We no longer care about being subjected to occupation. I mean, this has been the plan of Israel all along. It's psychotic, incidentally. And Sam Harris is nowhere even remotely close to being an expert on any of these things.
Crazy
that he pretends that. This is the guy, incidentally, again, literally wrote in defense of torture because of some hypothetical thing that he made up, and which incidentally was also a crappy hypothetical because it was so isolated in the implications of and nothing is that isolated. But go ahead. I mean, I love the fact that Henry Winkler is actually just destroying Bill Maher here.
And leading Maher to what he won't say, which is we just need to kill a bunch of people.
I mean, if you expect perfection,
I don't expect a perfection.
Well, then it's a silly argument.
I believe. Well, that's not true.
Well,
I believe that we are going to experience another Kristallnacht, and could very well experience it here.
Well, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and that comes from people like Hamas.
Yeah, I see.
So, I mean, again, when you're a leader, you have to think long term.
Right.
If you don't know, they prosecuted this war for 11 months, as we're recording this in September of 2024. So they're at the final stage. They're in the South. Yes, there are probably still, I don't know, 80, 90 hostages left.
Right, 100.
It's horrible to think of the situation they've been in, and if we can't get them out. Again, if I could just finish.
Yes, go ahead.
You have to think in terms of long-term and numbers. Like those 100 people, we wouldn't want anyone to die, but what if we let Hamas off the hook and then it gets worse and 10,000 die? That's how.
10,000.
Well, in the future. In other words, if they are able to stage more attacks.
I see. 10,000 more Israelis.
You've gone this far for 11 months. Mm-hmm. And my question to people who have this argument is always, do you know what's going on really underneath Gaza in all the tunnels and how close they are?
I do not know.
I don't either. But you know who does know? The Israeli Defense Force. Now, are they perfect? Absolutely.
Do they? Have we seen evidence of that?
Of the reason, just
of how well they know about this? I mean, if they really knew that much, would it really take them 11 months? I mean, really?
I've seen some CGI things that haven't quite panned out, but
this is just so twisted. He is so twisted.
Yeah.
Does know the Israeli Defense Force. Now, are they perfect? Absolutely not. But again, they're not the ones purposely killing civilians. They try not to kill civilians. And you can't understand
there is
that.
Absolutely no evidence for that assertion. We have seen reporting from Israel on their rules of engagement. We see the sheer numbers. We know that dropping 2,000-pound bombs on tents is going to kill civilians. So the idea that they try not to kill civilians, that's just simply not true. I mean, I don't even think you could say like they try and minimize the deaths of civilians. I mean, he's already used an example. Right. He has cited an example for the entire basis of his argument is literally the explicit and deliberate killing of hundreds of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians.
To send a message about their ideas.
I mean, he's literally, his entire argument is based on that premise. This myth of the most moral army is only propagated by people who don't have any basis on which to make this assessment. The International Criminal Court of Justice, the prosecutors are on record of saying that Israel is intimidated. We've read the reporting from The Guardian, from 972 Mag. Why would you do that? I mean, it's absurd. This relentless sort of propaganda about how this is a unique military. Go ahead.
Purposely killing civilians. They try not to kill civilians. If you can't understand that difference morally, then you're very morally confused.
Are you watching the same footage I'm watching?
You think they are trying to kill civilians?
I think that it is indiscriminate.
That's what war is.
Okay.
War becomes that. There is no war you can name that didn't. Sherman burned Atlanta to the ground, and it wasn't just the military people he was killing. It's a shame, but again, there's a very simple solution to this. Stop attacking Israel.
Right.
Jews used to know this.
Right. Okay.
Still love you.
I love you.
Okay.
I have no judgment about your point of view.
Great, and I not of yours.
I disagree a little bit with what you're saying.
Yeah, that's okay.
I don't think that the head of Israel at this moment is a soulful human being.
That may be true too. I didn't say he wasn't, and I didn't say even that he might not be doing what you suggested he might be doing. What I was saying is, even if those things are true, it could also be true that this is the correct policy, which I believe it is. I think you've gone 11 months to do this.
I love the fact that he's saying, Jews used to believe. Oh, really? Unbelievable. He is just horrible.
I mean, he was literally saying the same thing about invading Iraq after 9/11. We need to do this to show how powerful we are. Oh, and he supported Vietnam in the 90s. So yeah, this is Bill Maher.
Ramona Frankenstein, snipers are shooting children, Bill. Regular shoe Mike, I feel like Weinstein's thinking process works like a Who's on First skit. That's true. Buckets and buckets. Sam, why aren't you taking debates on Gaza? Why am I not? I'm happy to call in. I'm not taking debates on anything.
We had to get to the Bill Maher thing. This is why can I keep you guys for 10 more minutes so we can talk about this Bill Maher thing. So
a new thing?
Oh yeah. So Bill Maher was led around children, and I don't know why. Can we play the beginning? So this is how he saunters in to this event. Yeah. I guess he's on speaking with some kids on
the Club Random podcast.
Club Random. It's a bit, but he walks in with a bottle of booze. And let's just start right there.
Bill talks to kids. Oh, this is like
hi.
Hello.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Kyle.
And you're?
And I'm Beverly.
Beverly, of course.
Okay,
now,
so it's interesting because this is not actually the clip that I thought we'd play with him coming in with a drink. This is a different clip of him entering a conversation and putting a drink down. So every time he does this, he has a drink in his hand.
He's drinking the whole time. Yes, I mean, look.
And it's not even, this one is even less it doesn't even really acknowledge it. It's just I'm going to be drinking when I talk to these kids. It's not actually a bit.
No, it's not. It's not a bit. Right. He needs to be drunk at all times when he's doing his podcast. We have fun on our debate coverage or the DNC coverage because it's at night and we're having a good time doing a stream.
And we're not making content out of children.
And we're not interacting with minors. We played that clip of Bill Maher being extremely creepy with that girl who got famous for the Haktua thing, but has other ambitions, and he was trying to act as her mentor while being extremely creepy. So you can go back and look at that. And then
there's so much I would love to know about being a 21-year-old girl.
There's an excerpt. he was widely kind of criticized and made fun of for being a total like creepazoid, and then follows that up with Let's Talk to Kids segment, and didn't have the wherewithal to be like, maybe I won't show up totally blasted to interview children.
Well, let's keep it on the shot.
Yeah.
And listen, I don't mean to. Go ahead, Brendan.
And she's like stumbles out piss drunk, like a handle of vodka in hand, like reeking of weed, and it's just like, okay, kids, let's rap. Just let's youth pastor.
I also don't mean to like cast too many aspersions, but that's a heavy glass too. That thing just like thumped itself on the table.
It's just like, dude, just for this podcast with children one time, because remember that story about the guy from Jackass, Steve-O? Yes. Steve-O was going to go on Club Random, but he's sober and asked kindly, Bill Maher, could you not smoke weed or drink on the show when I appear? And Bill Maher said, no, you're like, I refuse, and you can't come on the show
I'm
now.
addicted.
But somehow everyone else is the asshole and not you. But here he is with children talking for some reason about Sofia Vergara.
Advice from an alcoholic would have made maybe a better
He
tagline.
was a snowflake.
But as someone who actually never watched Modern Family, tell me what the setup is and who the character is.
So it's a traditional family, kind of 2 parents, 3 kids.
Yuck.
Yeah.
What? 2 parents, 3 kids. What? The parents are like a man and a woman?
Yeah.
What? That's ridiculous.
And then it's gay parents with an adoptive daughter.
Okay.
And then a very young wife and a very old husband with a kid.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Played by Sofia Vergara for the young.
Oh, Sofia, she's hot, huh? So.
No, we have to go back. We need total silence to just embrace this cringe here. Okay, so first of all, he's complaining about, or he's making bizarre statements about culture,
how woke Modern Family
about wokeness to these little children. They're like, okay. And then he makes a crack about how there's nothing wrong with an older man being with a younger woman to these girls who are 12, 10, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then a very young wife and a very old husband with a kid.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Played by Sofia Vergara for the young.
Oh, Sofia Viagra, she's hot, huh? So I don't know who those people are. Okay, so and then so a gay couple, and then no Eskimos.
I don't know what that word is.
Eskimo? Oh
my God!
You know what an Eskimo is? No.
Okay,
Eskimo,
we got it.
Indigenous people.
Eskimo's a slur, actually.
Yeah, it's not the right thing to say. He just said Sofia Viagra to those little girls.
And some freak laughed off mic. You could hear the people just that they reference, like they're going laughing like crazy because Bill Maher just used a child as a set piece to make a Viagra joke for the enjoyment of some adults off screen.
But I think somebody, when I was making fun of this clip online, pointed out like, how is this different from they specifically referenced like Whitest Kids You Know. But I would say, the Whitest Kids You Know, they cultivated an entire show regarding this kind of humor and like more shock humor. This is seemingly coming out of nowhere. Like he just suddenly started interviewing kids. This is like the negative universe. Kids say the darndest things, right? But like it's just wildly inappropriate.
It's grooming. The way he's like,
yes.
Oh, they're gay, so like we have an opinion about that, right? Oh, and he's grooming these kids. This is another little segment here where he said,
I hope their parents were in full view.
Their parents should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, yeah. I mean, they may have not known. I don't know.
Well, they know now because this was fucking gross, and you should not put your kids in this sort of situation.
Yeah.
It's a style.
Oh, now, like I'm old.
No, it's like literally my brother, he has old like pair of jeans when he was like 12, and they should fit me actually, but sometimes they're a little long. I have these one jeans that are like actually big rips, that I think it was his or it was my sister's, but they actually fit me pretty nice and I like to wear them to school.
So did you wear the same kind of clothes when you started out life as a boy? I assume you're both transitioned. I assume you were a boy as a child and you were a girl. I mean, that's...
What?
No.
What?
No. Oh, well, I thought everybody these days was transitioning. No. You actually was born.
Yeah, I was.
And you were born a girl.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, fine. Whatever kink, whatever you're into, whatever weird stuff you're into is fine with me. Nothing weird about it.
I have no idea what you're talking about, so.
Oh my God! I'm in shock. I have nothing to say.
Someone has to flash the Chris Hansen signal in the sky and have him just walk out. This is becoming a bit of a problem. I don't understand. This reminds me of that Nathan Fielder thing where like a lot of his jokes involve kid actors, and you can see like the kind of the underarching point is that like parents will let their kids do a lot of things to let them be famous. And this is another example of that, but it's just so weird to see him, I guess, become like this. Like, this is just not the style of humor he was doing before. And he's not even prepared to talk to children. Like, I think
what humor?
He's grooming the kid. Like the older boy that's like, no, like that uncomfortable laughter is Bill Maher conditioning that kid or pressuring him toward a condition where he thinks that shit is embarrassing or like trans stuff is a joke.
Kids don't think this is funny. These jokes are for like 50-year-old men, like, 50-plus-year-old men who are like Bill Maher. Like, kids don't find this stuff as funny. I mean, maybe groiped out 19-year-olds online, but that's not these kids. These are like Gen Alphas. Like, they grow up with like this stuff.
Yeah, and the premise is that the premise of all these hysterical, gender fixated reactionary fucks is that all young kids are just bombarded with this stuff. These people don't know what the fuck he's talking about.
The little kids. I mean, honestly, the reality is that just trans kids are a very small fraction of the population in this country. We played the clip with Matt Walsh where he bloviated on Joe Rogan and said there were 1 million kids transitioning, and like they looked it up and it was in the thousands, like the lower thousands. I forget exactly what the figure was. And so he's just hysterical about it. But then at the same time in the previous clip, I mean, he's doing more than grooming about ideology about trans kids. He literally said to those girls, there's nothing wrong with an older man being with a younger woman.
And then Sophia Viagra, like,
get this guy get this guy away from children. We have one more, and this is just to make a point about how this person, first of all, HBO, maybe like have a sit down with this guy, okay? About your club random host.
Cut bait and move the fuck on. It's not 2000 anymore. Not that he was that good then anyway.
They tripled down because he's also now on CNN on the weekends where they replay his show.
It's crazy they fired him for the 9/11 stuff, but not this.
This. Yeah. Right. All right, here we go.
Oh, I'm going down a rabbit hole again. Okay, so you're on the internet. Wikipedia goes from one site to the next. What if it leads you to some place where you don't think you should probably be? Because I hear from parents, not that I'm one, but I hear they're very worried about what their kids are seeing on the internet.
I don't think I go on bad websites or anything.
But you could, right?
Yeah, if it takes me to one, I just exit it because there's nothing that...
Well, I mean, say you're interested in, like, climate change. So you start looking on that. That's a big issue. I mean, your kids are worried about it for a good reason. Okay, climate. It leads you to weather. Then you're looking up stuff about the weather. Then it leads you to Stormy Daniels. All right, now you're into porn. Now you're into a porn site. What do you...
What? I exit it.
There you go.
There you go.
You hear that, Paige?
Yeah.
If that happens to you, you're going to do the same thing?
Can we get off the subject of porn?
Clearly the Hawk Tuah girl was just like too intellectually developed for his bits, and so he had to go down like younger. That's no shade to her, like she's a young woman. So like this is like classic, I hate to say it, classic PDF file grooming. Like, you start at younger and younger women because like they become more and more immune to your charms the older they get. It's he's really spiraling. It's sad to see.
Genuinely, don't leave your kids with this guy.
I don't mean to be like, this is like some Karen-esque of me, but if I was watching this, I'd call the police potentially, or at least like think about it.
Yeah,
I would.
If the parents were not there, if the parents were not in the room, I would call the police. Like this is like not really acceptable. I think to put on like
it's not acceptable to be drunk and talk to children about pornography.
The amount of innuendo contained in these remarks, talking to children, and this man is 68 years old.
He's just saying it.
Right. I more mean in the sense of like he's sort of like he's trying to act as if he's almost like too slick for these kids by being like nothing wrong with that, right? I like younger women. Like it is one of the most nauseating things I've ever watched.
Like innuendo is what happens on like an episode of Family Feud where like Steve Harvey asks like, what would you hate to walk into your bedroom and see? And like,
what's bigger than a bread box?
Oh, yeah.
Like, my parents doing it, Steve.
Yeah, and Steve just goes.
Right, and then he'll saunter around for like a minute and be like, "Oh,
say that again, say that again."
And if the person, and the same thing, you know, I hate to bring up kids say the darndest things again because obviously the host of that was no role model.
True.
But like when kids, the purpose of those kinds of shows is that kids are supposed to say the inappropriate thing or like the vaguely inappropriate thing, and then you go like, "What do you know about that little man? What do you know about that little girl?" And then they just like they laugh, and the audience of all adults laugh too.
Yeah, the candor makes the adults sort of uncomfortable, not the other way around.
Yeah. I feel like I've become party to a crime watching this.
Me too. I don't even have commentary. I want this out there for the world to see. That's all. This is what people should see, that this is who Bill Maher is. There you go.
I'm just surprised, just like the Hawk interview, that it just happens in public. Like he just does this in public and people go, oh, this is a joke. This sounds like one of those transcripts from To Catch a Predator when they just read like what the pervert was sending to like the perverted justice people, where it's just like, what are you wearing? Oh, I wish I could see you in that. And it's just like very like weird stuff.
I know. All right, guys, we're gonna read some IMs and then get out of here now. I need a shower. Yes. Rob from Dedham. Bill Maher is the type to get outraged at the drag story time at the library, but as soon as he gets two kids in front of them, hey kids, do you know what a blumpkin is?
Yeah, Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, honestly. PDF files. So wait, Bill Maher's a PDF file for cracking sick jokes to children, but taking kids to strip shows and drag shows is perfectly fine and should be encouraged. Nothing bad there. Maher's grooming and drag queens stripping and twerking aren't.
Yeah, I don't think Drag Queen Story Hour is as bad as what Bill Maher just did. No, I think you're a fucking loser if you equivocate those two. So yeah.
But thanks for being a paid member.
Stupid asshole. Thanks for your money. Keep it make sure those details are updated when that card expires.
Will from Indiana. I cannot believe I ever used to find Bill Maher insightful or funny. He is so gross, and I hate that MFer so much. Granted, 8 years ago I was 14 years old, but even still, this is so messed up, and I'm glad, and many others have seen the light about him. He should not be within 500 feet of kids ever.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.